Next on this list is a game that's the first one to use more than one disc, was made by a British gaming studio, and just like Namco, also had a huge role for the PlayStation. And that's game number 19, Novastorm, an experimental combination between a rail shooter and full motion video, aka FMV, to see if it was revolutionary at the time. Published by Sony Computer Entertainment and developed by Psygnosis. The story takes place in the distant future, when the human population left Earth in several huge arcs, containing the Earth's ecosystem, in search of a new paradise. But they have become complacent, meaning every single thing has been controlled by artificial intelligence. While the human race sleeps and dreams of a new home, the AI systems evolved but prophesized of a conquest of silicon against flesh, and now calling them Scarab-Axe forces, and are trying to take over the universe. But the human society aren't going to take it. So you control of the Scavenger Force Squadron and must stop the AI forces before it's too late. The last hope for the human race depends on you. There's no development history for the game, which is just disappointing. So instead, let's talk about the company who made the game, Psygnosis. So here we go. The company was formed in 1984 after David Lawson, the founder, and Ian Hetherington, a financial director, after the collapse of their previous gaming company, Imagine Software, due to financial troubles, being owned by Ocean Software, and eventually their demise in the exact same year. Jeez, didn't expect that a company would be killed off very fast over a year. Anyways, after the whole incident, the company started out very well with their first game called Brataccas in 1986 for the home computers at the time. Years went by and the company was starting to get recognized in the gaming world until in 1991 they would release their most successful game they made, Lemmings, and did manage to get 2 Lemmings games as well as a spin-off for the PlayStation. But we'll wait for those for another time. This one in particular will be discussed about a couple games later. The spin-off would be coming for a while, and the other one, we just have to wait for a very long time. So by that time, Psygnosis became popular in Europe, but in North America, not so much. Why? Well, like most European gaming companies, it's very hard to reach out to the world outside of their continent. With the exception being Lemmings, that did get recognition in North America for both computers and consoles. Everything else, however, nobody never mentions or talk about the other games Psygnosis made. It was like that until everything changed in 1993, when Sony Computer Entertainment, or Sony Electronic Publishing back in the early years, acquired Psygnosis to become a subsidiary for Sony when they were a publisher and still called Sony ImageSoft. Only 4 games were made in the new Sony agreement, which were Bram Stoker's Dracula for both Super NES and Game Boy, Flink for Mega Drive or Genesis in the US, exclusively in Europe, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for Sega CD, and their most known game, with the help from Traveler's Tales, Mania, on every system like Super NES, Genesis, Sega CD, and PlayStation. And once again, I'm not reviewing that game because once more was PAL exclusive only. Oh, and side note, one of the designers of Mickey Mania by the name David Jaffe would go on and make one of the most popular series ever made for the console, but we'll get to that at some point. A 5th game by Psygnosis was made based on the 1993 movie of the same name, The Last Action Hero, for the Sega CD. But it ultimately got cancelled. Only the screenshots from old magazines are the only existence of the game. After that, Sony would quit being a publisher and would be in the hardware business and released the PlayStation in 1994 in Japan and sooner or later the rest of the world in 1995. In preparation for the September 1995 introduction of Sony's PlayStation console in Western markets, Psygnosis started creating games using the PlayStation as primary reference hardware. However, they didn't do that with the first North American game for this system, and that was Novastorm. Although we may never know how it was made, but we do know it's a combination of using pre-rendered FMV as the background, while all the spaceships, except for the bosses, are the only ones that use 2D sprites, including you as the player. Even though not the first one to use these combinations, it was quite interesting and revolutionary during the early to mid-90s at the time. Seeing all of that, this must mean it would be a great game, but when it was originally released for MS-DOS in 1994, it was a huge letdown and received negative reception. Reviewers like Electronic Gaming Monthly commented that the FMV is attractive, but the gameplay is shallow and unenjoyable. And another reviewer for Next Generation also found it too similar to Microcosm, another game by Psygnosis shockingly enough, and added that Microcosm was bad enough, but Novastorm doesn't even have the advantage of a knockout intro. However, this did not stop this game forever porting it to home consoles like 3DO, Sega CD, FM Towns, which the title was changed to Scavenger 4, and you guessed it, PlayStation. The only thing they changed in this version is the FMV being full screen, and features a redesigned minimalistic HUD. But the most important part of this version is the number of discs. Like I said, this is the first one to feature more than one disc. You see, instead of just using one disc, now you have 2 discs, due to how much content in a span of multiple discs. Nowadays, you can just fit all of it in one disc due to having a large amount of space. But back then, you really couldn't do that, and believe it or not, many people got excited over it. Why? Because seemingly with multiple discs, it means that the game is going to be a lot bigger and more total playtime. So obviously, Novastorm would be one of those games, right? Well, we'll get to that in the review part shortly afterwards. When the PlayStation port was released in Europe in September 29, 1995, which was a launch title over there, North America in November 2nd, 1995, and Japan in March 1st, 1996, it did not fare any better and got the exact same treatment like the MS-DOS version. Reviewer Air Hendricks of GamePro shared Scary Larry's conclusion, which he did the Sega CD version, that the game has stunning graphics but crude and dull gameplay, though he found it too difficult rather than too easy. He summarized, despite the eye-catching fireworks, this game plays like a stale B-grade shooter. So is it as bad as many people are saying it to be? Only one way to find out, and that's to review it. The graphics, and by that I mean the only 2D sprites on all of the ships, are alright and good looking, or unique, for the most enemy ships, and that's pretty much it for this segment. The presentation is okay. The FMV, which is the entire game, is at least passable by mid-90s standards, and does show off early CG at the time, which is nice. However, the only one thing that's sort of out of place is the intro cutscene, which is the only one that features live action characters, and you can tell by now they're using a blue screen and it's really noticeable. And the fact is that this is the only one just confuses me of why they even add this in if you're never going to use it to begin with. And another thing is the acting. Even though it's not as bad as the other games that did, which we will come across in the future, but still, it's a bit stale and laughably bland dialogue, especially this part.
My god, this thing's unbelievable.
I don't know why, but the way he says it is that he just doesn't give a damn. Oh, and finally, the game HUD is fine, nothing more. The music is great, like mostly every European game in the 90s. It has this fine tune of some kick-ass techno beats and Euromix to it, which I enjoy fondly. But the only thing that cuts back is that there are some sound effects in the soundtrack, since it was part of the game's cutscenes, which is just too bad. But what can you do? And finally, the gameplay. First, the controls. It plays alright and the movement is okay. And second, the power-ups, I actually do like them quite much, with so much beams shooting at those enemies. So with that, you think it may be an okay shooter, right? Well, almost, if it wasn't the fact that the game is hard, but not in a good way. Like seriously, the screen moves very fast, and sometimes you can't be hit, not just the enemies, but the backgrounds as well. This would be fine in a normal 3D shooting game, but keep in mind, every single background is pre-rendered graphics, so meaning half the times you get hit by the background and often get confused of what's hitting you. The worst part about it is dodging it, and oh god, this is painful. Like seriously, half the time thinking I could go that way until, whoops, you got hit. It's not my fault that I'm bad at dodging, it's just the screen moves too fast. Why couldn't they just add in arrows so that way it could be much easier instead of guessing which way to go? And the final thing to talk about is switching to a second disc. Now, remember I said that with multiple discs, seemingly the game would be bigger and total playtime, and Novastorm would be one of them. Well, the answer is no. The total playtime is about 40 plus minutes long, and there are only 16 levels in the entire game. And they're pretty short as well, which is a huge letdown. So why they didn't just make a one-disc game? Well, due to the fact that the whole game is FMV and they couldn't handle it due to that it's a compact disc, they couldn't really do that back in the day. Oh, and after you finish the second world, you'll have to switch to another disc. This may not be bad at first, but get a game over, you have to switch back to disc 1, and once you select a level by a cheat code, which is the only way I could see the rest of the levels due to not having a memory card save feature, you have to switch to disc 2 again. But once you keep dying again, you have to keep switching discs over and over again. Like, this feels more like a chore rather than excitement. And that's all the rambling about the gameplay. And now, let's go on to the conclusion. The game is not fun, and to be completely honest, it doesn't feel like a game at all. It feels more like a 3D ride, but at the last minute tried to turn it into a game, which is a fail. Now, I'm not saying it's completely terrible, there are some good parts, like the design of the ships and the soundtrack. But still, not enough to call this game good or even okay. Thus, Psygnosis' first game got off to a very bad start, and just should have cancelled the port instead. However, this does not mean it was the only game they made. This is just one of the 5 games released in North America back in 1995, and some of them did become classics and finally got their recognition to the US, but we'll just have to wait. As for the first game for this system, it's not awful thanks to the soundtrack and the okay pre-rendered CGI backgrounds, but everything else is too difficult, unfair obstacles, and switching discs too many times makes this game unenjoyable and painful to play. I give my official rating a 2 out of 6. Next time on the PlayStation years, we go back to Namco and tackle one of their most popular 3D fighting game series they have ever made for this system, and my opinion should have been the rival to Sega Saturn's Virtual Fighter. What is that game? Well, I'll tell you in the next review. Thanks for watching.